Live, and I think that we started a little early on this. Again, welcome to WordStream, where we're going to examine 21st century issues real time from a biblical perspective, talking about community, well being, and lifestyle. We're going to talk about the rise in Black youth suicide. And so my brain's a little foggy, so please excuse me for that. But we'd like to welcome you tonight and those who will be viewing this later. Again, comments, if you have any comments tonight, we ask that you would bring those as we begin to explore this topic of Black suicide among our youth. And tonight, I tried to wear different t shirts. Tonight, I am wearing Contending for Children Initiative t-shirt because what we're talking about tonight is one of the issues that is part of In the Word Ministries. And of course, In the Word Ministries is a faith-based organization that sponsors WordStream. But Contending Children is one of a program that was put together on last January. The intent of it is to really look at how we can recapture the hearts of our children for the kingdom of God. And we do that by working with community sectors to increase each child's capacity to become. And that's the definition of potential. So in July of last year, NIA Project with Terry Barnes, Metropolitan Missionary Baptist Church, and In the Word Ministries joined together and hosted a program entitled Contending for Our Children, at which time we invited several experts in the area of two pieces that we feel are very important and critical to our children. One dealing with reading and literacy, the other with mental health. And it was at that time that we were able to have and enter into conversation with our guest tonight, Dr. Shayla Sullivant. As we look at the mental wellness piece, there were three key components that we found that would be the church's response. And that was the intent of the event, is what's the church's response to this? We have a lot of responses from community-based organizations, other institutions, but what is the church that lives in the community? What can we do to address it? So the three areas is to raise awareness, to identify mental health resources and remove barriers to care, and then create strategies that support a continuum of care. And so what that has done for us tonight is to bring our first guest of the year, Dr. Shayla Sullivant. She was one of the experts on panel that day who came and just really brought us key data that we were not aware of with reference to suicide with our children. For the past 10 years, Dr. Shayla has been on staff at Children's Mercy in Kansas City and serves as associate professional. The suicide prevention group that she co-leads are looking at understanding and providing education around how parents can reduce the risk of suicide for adolescents, which includes safe storage. Now, one of the things I love in talking to Dr. Shayla tonight and the other days and the other occasions that we've talked is you will really hear her passion as we discuss many of the topics for tonight. She has two children, 14 and 12. And so I'm sure that that's motivation for many of the things that she does because she has children and she sees the impact of suicide in their life. She describes it as her life work. And that's one of the reasons I think that Contending for Children Initiative, we were so drawn to her and just asked her if she would please come on and share some of her wisdom with us tonight. So all that being said, I'm trying to think if there's anything else, Dr. Shayla, I can say about you before I bring you on board, other than the conversation we had is that we wanted to share information. We didn't want to scare you, but we want to let you know the real facts and that there is something that we can do about changing and impacting that statistic. So, with that in mind, I am now going to bring on Dr. Shayla Sullivant.
Hi, Eileen. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really humbled to be here today. And I so appreciate all of the work that you're doing and leading. These are hard topics and hard things to talk about. But I think if we want to make some headway with them, we have to go for it. We have to lean into that discomfort. So thank you so much for having me tonight.
Oh, well, thank you for coming. And I tell you what, we have a series of questions. You know the rules of the game here on WordStream. And so we're going to start off with the first question and see how our viewers respond. And the question is this: while suicidal thoughts and plans decreased for most youth between 1991 and 2017, attempts increased for which of the following youth? And this is a multiple choice. And we'll be looking for comments to see if people can have any questions or response to that question. Okay. And our first, okay, we have Miss Terry Barnes, and she said B, and B would be the right answer. Okay, very, very good, Terry. Thank you so much for tuning in on that. And we'll go right back over here. The answer is B. Okay. And would you share a little bit of that? Share a bit about what's happening with that. Terry Smart said, Terry's really smart. Yes, you are, Terry.
Terry's on top of it. She's ahead of the game. Well, I think she is. I will tell you, years ago, I was listening to the radio and I heard a reporter say, you know, we don't have a problem with suicide in the Black community. It doesn't happen in the Black community. And I was so frustrated because a lot of research, as you see with these headlines, was coming out saying the exact opposite. So I think what's happened is historically, suicide rates were lower in the Black community as compared to white counterparts. But unfortunately, that's been changing for quite a few years. You know, the data always lags behind a little bit. And so, what we know is that, particularly for young people, we've seen some pretty concerning increases in recent years. And I think the first step to addressing a problem is to know about it, really. And so, like you mentioned, I don't want to scare people, but I think it's important to be aware of these facts so that then we can do something about it.
Excellent. All right. And with that, we're going to move right into our next question, which is true or false? As Black youth get older, the risk of suicide by firearms increases. Is that true or false? Looking for comments. And I'm going to answer that because I think that that is a true statement. Um, Especially, it seems like many children are emotionally immature and not knowing how to really handle responses that are coming to them via social media.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that are impacting their self image? That's why self image is so important. And so I think that risk just increases as you get older and less assured about yourself. Okay.
Right. I think that's true. And we know that we'll get to this, but for young people, you know, there can be a real feeling of despondence, like that everything is awful and terrible because of a bad incident that's happened in your life. And young people can at times struggle to see past tomorrow and to see that just because this really awful thing happened, it doesn't mean that it's always going to feel this bad. And the problem with access to firearms is that they are so very powerful. And when they are used in a suicide attempt, they are so often lethal. They are the most lethal method that exists. And so that leads me to get really motivated about making sure people understand that so that we can secure firearms.
Okay.
So this slide here, Eileen, really kind of talks about some of the highlights that I think are concerning but important to know, that we have seen some significant increases, particularly for young Black females when it comes to suicide deaths. And I think this is really important to be aware that among young people dying by suicide, only a fraction of them have a documented mental health problem when they die. And this is not a new phenomenon. It's actually quite common when you look at the literature that when young people die by suicide, they are often not in treatment when they die. And so to me, that is a travesty. You think of, we don't have any young children in our community dying of cancer without ever getting the benefit of diagnosis or treatment. And so I think just being able to do a better job of identifying who's at risk is one of the things we need to do to reverse this problem. When we think about what the risk factors are, we know for younger kids in the Black community, it tends to be more if they're having problems at school or with family. And as kids get older, we see it tends to be more about romantic relationships, or if they've experienced some kind of punishment like legal or criminal problems. So the risk factors adjust as we age.
Okay. And one of our Facebook users said, true, easier to get guns, racism, colorism, weight, self deprecation.
Mhm.
Also in 2019, the Black Caucus did a study on suicides in youth, the rise in suicides in youth. And it's an interesting report that we'll put out on our Facebook page for Contending for Children for you to take a look at, but it just supports everything that you're seeing locally, but on a national basis on that.
For sure. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you guys for responding and keeping that in. Let's go and talk about diagnosis. One of the things that you talked about was its relationship to age. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we don't often have a diagnosis. Not every young person that dies by suicide has been diagnosed, but among those that have, we see that it really varies based on age. So historically, we've always thought that depression is one of the biggest predictors of a future suicide attempt. And that seems to hold true as our young people get older. So you see that 67% there means that 67% of the 15 to 17-year-olds met criteria for depression. So feeling down, low energy or irritability, lack of interest in things, some of those classic things we think of with depression. I think what's really startling on this slide is when we look at ADHD. So that's the acronym for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. That's a common disorder that we often see in young people. It's one of the most common mental health conditions for young children. And it's really associated with lots of impulsivity. And what we see here is that for the youngest kids, and it's hard to even imagine that we are losing children in the 5 to 11-year-old age group,
Wow.
but we are. The numbers are much smaller for the younger kids, but they exist. That a high fraction of them meet criteria for ADHD. And so I think it's important to think about that we're not just looking for what you might expect, someone who's depressed and sad, but we also see that young kids with high levels of impulsivity who might get angry and act out very quickly and impulsively are at higher risk. And I think that's important because we know there's a lot of barriers to seeking care and to getting treatment for kids, particularly for young people of color. And so just another reason why we need to decrease those disparities.
Okay. And Terry has a question. Is this unique to Black children or across the board? Are white children more likely to have a mental health problem prior to death?
That's a great question. Not necessarily. I can't cite a great study, Terry, that compares, but there's a study by Fowler that showed that 82% of young people who die by suicide with a firearm are not in treatment when they die. And there's another study that was done up in Minnesota that looked at, it was a majority white sample, and the majority of them had not been diagnosed either. So I think part of the challenge is that when someone uses a firearm, they are so, um, it is so powerful and so lethal that there's no chance for, there's no second chances in terms of recovery. Um, but I think we have a lot of room for improvement really for everyone. But we know that Black children are less likely to get diagnosed and get treated.
Okay. And a phrase that we hear quite a bit is suicide ideation.
Yeah.
Suicide ideation. Will you go into that a little bit for our audience so we can kind of understand how that fits with the profile?
Sure. So, suicidal ideation is something that can happen with any diagnosis. It's really just having the idea or the thought of wishing you weren't alive and wanting to end your life. So, I've had a lot of patients that I've worked with that have told other people, oh, I'm not suicidal. So sometimes the S word is uncomfortable. But if I say to them, have you had thoughts that you wish you weren't alive, or thoughts that you could go to sleep and not wake up? When kids say yes to that, that's really concerning to me, because it's all under that umbrella of ideation, wishing that you weren't alive, wanting to not be alive. And it's really related to suffering. It's not necessarily that the young person wants to die, but usually they're suffering in some way and they want the suffering to end, and they're seeing that as their path forward. And so our job is really to show them there are other paths forward out of the suffering. You don't have to end your life.
And that's the good news. That's the good news that we want to talk about and spend the remainder of the time talking about, that there is a solution out. And some of the suggestions that are listed here are options that we can look at. So if you will speak, then I have one to tell you of my favorite one that's listed up there.
Sure. Well, I think schools are a great place for intervention. So it's listed there that they may not be ideal, but a lot of kids have gotten help from school social workers and counselors. So I don't want to knock that, but I also think we need to acknowledge that there are clear documented disparities, that a lot of Black youth have experienced more disciplinary actions in school environments for the same behaviors as their white counterparts. They've been disciplined more harshly. And so that can lead to a lack of comfort in a school setting, where you may not feel comfortable talking to a school counselor about your own mental health needs, because maybe you were punished harshly a couple weeks ago and you just don't feel safe with that person. So I think schools are an option, but not our only option. I think some of the community-based interventions, like Contending for Children, I think are really important to look at. Where are the places and spaces where families feel comfortable already, that they go to seek support and help? And faith-based communities are a huge part of that for many people. Community centers, even I've talked to folks that do events at parks where kids play basketball. Like, there's all kinds of ways that we can be creative about seeking out young people. I think we have to remember that young males may have a harder time accepting intervention. There can be a lot of stigma with accepting mental health support at all, but in particular for males who are often taught that they need to be tough and not be vulnerable, this can be hard. And then we could talk for a really long time about trauma and systemic racism and how they play a role. They play a huge role, I think, in this. And I think that's a big part of why some of these rates have gone up. And it's something we need to continue to address and chip away at. How can we decrease the disparities? How do we extend care so it's equitable? It's a hard one.
Okay. All right. Do you see, with reference to the last point on trauma and systemic racism, do you see any programs, I don't want to put you on the spot, that are successful within our community in really looking at trauma and its impact on mental wellness for our Black children?
Sure. So I think there are a lot of different options. I've probably had most exposure to individualized treatment because of the setting in which I work at a children's hospital. And so I have personally had patients that have engaged in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And so those are kids that have been through a specific traumatic event, where it was a shooting, a car accident, a loss of a family member, and they have developed PTSD from that. And I've seen them work through their trauma narrative with their therapist. And it's a very structured program, and really come out on the other end functioning very well, not having the same nightmares, not having the same avoidance behaviors. So yes, I'm a big fan of identifying trauma, because when we identify it, then we can do something about it. And there's some good interventions that really work.
Okay. All right. And moving right along here. When we looked at this slide, I did my guess of what I thought this was about. And of course, I was wrong, but it was still a good response.
You were close.
I was close.
Yeah.
So, Shayla, would you share
Sure.
this picture here?
Yeah, when I think about where we need to head with regards to reducing suicides for young people in our community, I like to think back to a similar initiative that was complicated and difficult, and that was reducing car accident deaths for young people. So, if we had a graph of it, we would see that those deaths have come down significantly in recent years. Now, if you were alive in the 1970s, you know that seatbelts were not welcomed by many people. There was a lot of controversy, a lot of pushback. A lot of people said, you're not going to tell me what to do in the privacy of my own car. That seatbelt's uncomfortable. I don't want to wear it. And now most of us just get in the car and it beeps at us until we put it on, and we just cooperate because we know it saves lives. And it's not just the seatbelts that made a difference with reducing the deaths. It was also Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and it was speed limits, and it was anti-lock brakes. And there are so many changes that came together to help reduce the motor vehicle accident deaths. And that's how I think about suicide. I think that there's not one answer. There's going to be multiple answers to this problem. And I don't want to oversimplify it tonight, but I do think there are some changes that we as a community could make right now that could make a huge difference.
Okay. All right. And with that in mind, I think we'll have a question. And the question is, what is the most common method used by Black youth who die by suicide? Overdose of medication, death by asphyxiation, hanging, fire injury, or jumping?
And Eileen, can I just comment that this is a hard thing to talk about? And I'm aware that for many people to even hear those words, it is so upsetting and disturbing. And if you've had your own personal experiences with suicide, this is not meant to further upset you. The reason why I think it's important for us to have some awareness is, again, then we can do something about it. But I just want to acknowledge that it can be very painful to even talk about this.
Okay. And Terry's catching up with us. So we were right with you, Terry, on that one. And so which one do you think is the most common use?
What, you want me to answer?
No, I was waiting to see if Terry or anyone else was on board.
Sure.
Okay, going once, going twice. All right, I'll let you take that, Dr. Shayla.
Yeah, so firearms are account for approximately half of young suicides in our community, but death by asphyxiation or hanging tends to be the most common method for young Black people who die by suicide. And that is hard because it's hard to control all the things in our home environment that could be used for that method of death. But I also think it's good to know about it, because if you have a family argument and your son goes up to his room and slams the door, you might want to go check on him. You know, these are the times where we want to check on each other.
Okay. And with that, it kind of leads us into the next slide as we're talking about low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. So I am a big proponent of looking at the low-hanging fruit. What is the fastest, quickest change we could make as a community to reduce deaths? And this suicide is a complex problem, and it's not something that we're going to fix overnight. So I don't want to pretend like I think it's easy. But when I see that approximately half of the young suicides in our community are with a firearm, not to mention all of the homicides that we see and all the preventable injuries when we have children finding a gun that they shouldn't have found under a couch cushion, we know that there are a lot of deaths we could prevent if we limited access to firearms. And I agree with Terry that this is so painful. Yes. So this is why I've gotten really focused in my work with trying to empower caregivers, people that are raising kids, to limit access to firearms and also medications in the home. We see hundreds of kids every year at Children's Mercy who come into the hospital after they overdose on medication. And most of them tell me, I took a handful. You know, they have access to handfuls of medicine, which seems kind of boggles my mind that we have access to something so dangerous, but we also don't talk about it very much, that over-the-counter medicines can be very dangerous. So I created a presentation to educate parents about this. And we found that parents are really busy and it's hard for parents to join for a 7 p.m. meeting. So then we decided let's make some on demand videos that parents could watch when they have time. So if you have 3 minutes on your lunch break or you're exhausted at 11 o'clock at night, but you have a little bit of energy to watch some videos, this is for you. And it's really for caregivers raising young people. And we have several different topics that we cover. One of them is about taking care of yourself as a parent, but there's a really big focus on how to talk to your kids about suicide and how to make your home safer by limiting access to firearms and medications. So we have a research study because we really want to measure, is this helpful? Is it making a change for people? And so we invite them to go to our website. If they want to, they can fill out a survey and watch the videos. It takes about 45 minutes. And then they do a post survey where they enter their name and address, and we mail them this toolkit. So the current toolkit has a medication lockbox. So I've got a similar sized one right here. So they're pretty good size because a lot of us have quite a few medications in our homes right now. And then we have 4 of these weekly medication organizers. So the goal is lock up those big supplies of medicines and just have a small amount available to help you stay on track with taking them. And then we actually provide people with a bag to dispose of their old medicines. And we give them, this one has kitty litter. You can use kitty litter, coffee grounds, or dirt, something animals don't like to eat. You mix your medicine with that and you throw it in the trash. So you want to get that out of the house. So if you have old medicine you don't need, that's one way to do it. And dish soap is a great way. So we use dish soap. And then firearm owners also get a cable gun lock and a gun lock box. And our whole goal is not to be against firearms or against medication, but to store them safely so they're not quickly available for young people in the community. We've enrolled over 500 adults throughout Kansas and Missouri, and our goal is really to reach more people. We want to reach more men, more people of color, and more firearm owners. These are some quotes from some of the people that have participated. One of the things we find is that it seems that the videos encourage people to think about this topic in a way they hadn't thought about before. They just hadn't contemplated maybe that having access to that bottle of medication could be so dangerous. Or perhaps they're not the person responsible for the gun storage at home. Maybe you have a partner at home and they're the ones that owns the gun. And so maybe it's time to have a discussion about how that gun is stored, or is it loaded? Can it be unloaded, locked up with ammunition locks separately? So we've been excited because we really didn't want to offend people. We know that people have firearms for lots of different reasons. And our goal is not to rid the community of firearms, but more to make sure they're secured so we don't have unintended users getting to them. And our feedback's been really positive that folks don't seem offended. They seem to understand, and they don't want any of these preventable deaths to happen. So there's 2 options if folks want to participate in our program called Prepped and Ready. The first is from home. So you could go to the website and just participate from home, even tonight if you wanted to, or whenever you see this. The study is running until we run out of toolkits, and we can send up to 1 toolkit per household. So if you have a divorced family and there's 2 different households, that's fine. Both parents could participate. But the main thing is to fill out the surveys, and that gives us feedback so we can really learn from the community. And then we mail the toolkit to you at home. And then we also are using some funding that we were awarded last summer from the Kansas City, Missouri Health Levy Innovation Fund. So we were really excited about that because that's allowing us to partner with community groups to host some viewing events. And we are actively seeking community partners that are willing to host us. We already have the videos put together. We already have the flyers. All we need to do is find community leaders that are willing to host us. So we found historically churches and schools tend to be great venues for this. Those are places where adults are often comfortable going, but we're really flexible. We've been to other locations as well. We basically just need a screen and a projector to be able to show the videos and chairs for people to sit down. At the group viewing events, because of that funding, we also can award people a $35 gift card to compensate them for their participation in the research. So if anybody watching is interested, and wants to hear more or talk to us about it, they can just email us there at preppedandready@cmh.edu. I would give you my personal email, but it gets a little full sometimes, and this email has several eyeballs on it, not just mine, but my research assistant checks this one too, so we're sure to get back to you more quickly.
Excellent, excellent. And I hope that we can have you come back. When will the research project end? Because, of course, we would like to know what happens at the end of this and what you find.
Sure.
What's your timeline currently?
Well, so the health levy funding is supposed to end in early summer. And so by then, we're hoping to enroll all of the people. But I can't really say, Eileen, that it's all going to end. I mean, I'm just working on submitting our second paper. We have more data. We plan to continue this work. We're just looking
Okay.
at expanding. Are we going to go for a national project where we enroll people from different states? So far, we've really focused regionally in Kansas and Missouri. But we would be happy to share our data with you. It's always fun for me to go back to a community and share the results, share what we've learned. Everything is de-identified. We're very cautious about protecting personal identity. So we report it out in a group,
Right.
hundreds of people. So you can't identify who the data is from or what particular community it's from. But it's exciting to see that people are really open to these changes.
And so we will be bringing you back in the fall so you can give us an update or whenever you tell us you're ready to share.
Sure.
Because I think that's the thing that will keep this alive. This is something that we all have to really commit to. And it's alarming. That's why we are sounding the alarm on this. We'll close with this one question, unless someone would like to send in a closing question. What would you like the audience today to walk away with? What's the one thing that you hope that they take away from the broadcast tonight?
Well, you said I was passionate earlier, and you're right. I am so full of energy around this topic because I really believe in our community. I have to admit that I spent a lot of time in my office working with patients and families, and I love that work. But this work with the community really invigorates me because we have so much room to improve. And I envision a day where people look at a chart and say, my goodness, what are they doing in the Midwest? Why is it that they still have a lot of guns there, but they are not having the same rate of suicides as other people?
Hmm.
I think it's possible that we could be outliers here because what I'm finding is that people are very open to these small changes. It's not difficult to make some of these changes. It may be a little awkward or uncomfortable to have some of these conversations at home, but it's possible. And so that's the thing I would say is to not be overwhelmed or intimidated by the bad data, but more to feel inspired that we have an opportunity in front of us. And we're lucky that there are some options that we haven't taken yet when it comes to storage that could make a big difference.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we thank you, Dr. Shayla. We look forward to you coming back and just being a part of this initiative with us. We just feel very excited. And we will be partnering with Dr. Shayla, Contending for Children Initiative, as we kick off our mental wellness initiatives beginning in second quarter of 2023. So you'll be hearing from her again. I'm going to also leave her slide up so we could close out with that. So, Dr. Shayla, I'm going to let you go at this point
Okay.
and
Thank you
say
so
thank
much.
you very much. And we'll see you again in the fall.
Sounds great. Thanks, Eileen. Take care.
Thank you. And so we will leave that up as we close out tonight. Again, um, we have a lot that we can take in and begin to share with people as we look at how do we begin to address this whole issue of suicide in the Black community. Again, you'll be hearing more from Contending for Children initiative as we move forward with our mental health and our reading initiative. We're going to bring that initiative on board and share some information with you. So for tonight, we ask that you would share this with your friends and family, and we look forward to seeing you again on the Word Stream. Thank you. Bye bye.